Welcome. You have arrived. Not by chance, not too early, not too late, but exactly when your soul is ready. This is the empty boat, a place where words are gentle, stories breathe, and silence carries more meaning than noise. In a world full of answers, here we begin with questions. Who are you without your name? What remains when everything you clung to begins to drift away like leaves in autumn? Sit down, dear friend. Let the weight of your day melt into the floor. Let your breath grow long, your shoulders soft, your heart open. Tonight, I will tell you stories, not to teach, but to remind, not to preach, but to touch the quiet places inside you that long to be heard. Each story is a floating candle on the river of time. Let it pass before you. Watch, listen, feel, and, if a single sentence stays with you, as a whisper, as a seed, as a stillness, then perhaps you have already arrived at the shore you were always searching for. Story 1. The Leaf That Let Go. The autumn wind arrived quietly that year. In the highlands where the monastery stood, surrounded by moss-covered stones and ancient pine trees, the seasons did not declare themselves loudly. They whispered. Leaves browned gently, almost politely, before releasing their hold. The air grew sharper, but not cold. There was still warmth, though of a quieter kind, like a fire that no longer flared, but glowed steadily. One such morning, an old monk named Yorin sat beneath a maple tree. He had been sitting there for years, in different bodies, different lives, it seemed. But today, he was simply still. His eyes, half-lidded, watched a single leaf. Red as blood, delicate as breath, it clung to the branch above him with a quiet stubbornness. He smiled. Still not ready, are you? The leaf did not answer. It didn't need to. He understood. Letting go was always the hardest part. He remembered a time long ago when he too had clung tightly to titles, to people, to memories he mistook for truth. Before the robes, before the silence, before the retreat into the hills, he had been a teacher in the city, respected, admired, but none of that had lasted. Nothing ever did. A loss, a betrayal, and the fragile scaffolding of identity he had built collapsed in a single season of grief. He came here after that, not to run away, but to stop chasing. And yet, even in stillness, the mind does not easily forget the feel of holding on. He tilted his head back again. The leaf trembled, a tiny shiver in the breeze. Why do you resist? He whispered. You are already falling. Even now the tree has let go of you. The leaf still did not fall. He closed his eyes, letting his breath grow deep, like roots seeking water. Around him, the world moved on. Birds called in the distance. A monk's sandals brushed gravel. Tea steamed on a nearby stone. Life, in its many tiny gestures, continued. But he remained in the space between breath in and breath out, between holding on and letting go. And then, gently, something changed. A breeze, light as forgiveness, passed through the maple's limbs. The leaf quivered once more and fell, not dramatically, not suddenly. It simply released. It accepted the pull of gravity, the invitation of earth, and surrendered. It drifted down in spirals, graceful, slow, inevitable, and landed at last in the monk's open palm. Yorin looked down. So, he said quietly. You were never afraid of falling. You were afraid of flying through the unknown. He placed the leaf gently on the stone beside him. He did not hold it. He had learned better. That evening, as the last light of day melted into a golden hush, the novice monk Rin approached him. Rin was young, bright-eyed, still full of questions like sparks in dry grass. He had seen the old monk sitting under this maple, as he often did, but today something had shifted in the elder's face. A softness, a space. Master Yorin, Rin said, bowing slightly. What were you watching today? The art of surrender, the old monk replied. Rin blinked. A leaf, Yorin smiled. A master. Reflection on letting go in Zen. We often speak of non-attachment, not as a denial of life, but as a deeper participation in it. The leaf that falls is not dead. It is fulfilling its path. What dies is not the leaf, but the illusion of permanence. Trees shed, clouds drift, even mountains erode. To let go is not to lose. It is to align. Like the leaf, we often cling not because we are strong, but because we are afraid. We grasp identities, expectations, relationships, even our pain, with such intensity that we forget we are held by something larger. The tree had already let go of the leaf. The branch had already released. It was only the leaf's illusion of control that remained, and so with us. We imagine we are holding things up. In truth, life carries us more than we carry it. Psychological insight. Why we cling from a psychological perspective. Our resistance to letting go often arises from trauma or fear of the unknown. Control becomes a shield. Predictability becomes safety. The familiar, even if painful, becomes more desirable than uncertainty. The child who was abandoned clings to every relationship. The professional who was humiliated clings to performance. The soul who once drowned clings to shallow waters. We fear that if we let go, we will fall endlessly. But in truth, as the body softens into gravity, the spirit learns to float. Letting go is an act of trust, not in the world, which is ever-changing, but in the inner stillness that remains unshaken. Closing meditation. A gentle inquiry. Tonight, before sleep finds you, return to your breath. Ask yourself, what am I still holding that no longer holds me? Where am I clinging like a leaf, even though the branch is gone? Sit with this question. Don't force an answer. Just breathe. As the Buddha said, you only lose what you cling to. So, loosen the fingers of your heart. Let the past slip like a golden leaf through your thoughts. It will not fall far. Perhaps it will land in the palm of peace. Good night, dear one. We'll meet again, under another tree, beside another question. Story 2. The Bowl of Silence. There was a bowl in the monastery that no one used. It was not cracked, nor dusty, nor hidden from sight. It rested on the central altar in the meditation hall, clean and empty, with no purpose other than to be there. New visitors often asked about it. Novices speculated it was sacred, perhaps used in secret by the abbot, but no one dared touch it. It was simply called the Bowl of Silence. One rainy morning, a young nun named Sayo sat before the bowl after a long session of zazen. She had struggled through the meditation. Her breath had wandered. Her thoughts had clung to a letter she had received from her mother. Urgent, pleading, saturated with guilt. The past, long buried, had resurfaced like steam from cracked earth. And now, as the rain tapped softly on the roof above, she stared at the empty bowl, heart heavy, mind noisy. She found herself speaking aloud, though no one else was there. Why are you always empty? The bowl, unsurprisingly, did not respond. I wish I could be like you, she murmured. Still, whole, unbothered. Behind her, a quiet shuffle. She turned. It was Elder Nun Amiko, a woman well past 70, her voice as soft as the rain. Her presence, though gentle, had the weight of centuries. Sayo bowed deeply. I didn't know you were here. Amiko smiled. I wasn't, but I came because I heard your question. Sayo flushed. It wasn't really a question. But it was, Amiko replied, sitting down beside her. You asked why the bowl is always empty, and you wished to be like it. She paused. You're not alone. Sayo looked down. I can't quiet my mind, sister. I sit, I breathe, I follow every instruction, but inside it's loud. I can't seem to empty myself like that bowl. Amiko leaned closer. Ah, but my dear, the bowl is not empty. Sayo blinked. What do you mean? There's nothing inside it. There is silence, Amiko whispered. And silence is not the absence of noise. It is the space that allows sound to come and go without staying. Sayo looked back at the bowl. Every morning, Amiko continued, we chant, we bow, we light incense. But this bowl remains still. It holds everything, and it clings to nothing. When Sayo was a child, her home was filled with noise, not the joyful kind, but the kind that scratched at the soul. Her father yelled, her mother wept. Doors slammed, televisions shouted, glass sometimes broke. In that house, silence was terrifying because it never lasted. It was the pause before a storm, the moment before something shattered. Even when she escaped to the mountains, she brought that fear with her. Every time the meditation hall fell quiet, her heart braced for impact. I don't know how to be silent, she confessed. Not truly. When it's quiet outside, the noise inside only gets louder. Amiko nodded. Because you believe silence means absence, but true silence is presence. She let the words settle like mist. The bowl doesn't reject sound. It lets it arrive. It lets it pass. But it never becomes the sound. And when the noise ends, it remains. Reflection. The nature of silence in Zen. Silence is not just the lack of speaking. It is a posture of the soul. It is the space that allows insight to arise, unforced, like a clear sky that holds the clouds, or a still lake that reflects without resistance. The bowl of silence is not powerful because it is empty. It is powerful because it welcomes everything and identifies with nothing. We often imagine peace as a state we must reach, one that requires escaping our thoughts, emotions, and histories. But true peace is not found in pushing away. It is found in becoming the container for what arises and letting it pass without ownership. Silence is not empty. It is vast. Psychological insight, internal noise and fear of stillness. In modern life, we are trained to fear silence. We fill every moment with distraction, phones, voices, tasks, background noise. Beneath that, there is often something we don't want to face. Childhood trauma, unspoken grief, unmet needs, old shame. Silence confronts us with what noise conceals. But when we allow ourselves to be still, not with the intent to escape, but to meet what is, we begin to soften. Like Sayo, we realize that the noise is not the problem. Our identification with it is. You are not your thoughts. You are not your stories. You are the bowl. You can hold what comes. You can let it pass. And still, remain whole. Closing meditation. Becoming the bowl tonight before you sleep. Sit in silence. No music. No guidance. Just breath. You may feel discomfort at first. Let it be there. Welcome it. Ask gently, what sound have I been running from? What truth have I avoided in the noise? Then breathe again. Let each thought come, like a raindrop in the bowl. Watch it ripple, and let it dissolve. As the Buddha said, silence is an empty space. Space is the home of the awakened mind. The bowl of silence is within you. You don't need to fill it. You only need to stop spilling it. Rest now. Tomorrow, the world will make its noise again, but tonight, let it be still. Story 3. The Monk Who Smiled at Storms. No one remembered exactly when he had arrived. He was there when the youngest novice entered the monastery, and he was still there when that novice grew old. Always seated by the garden wall, the same robe, the same posture, the same quiet smile. He was called many names over the years: Old Reed, the silent laugher, the monk of the wind, but most simply called him Koji. And Koji smiled, even when the wind howled, especially when it did. It was said that storms always arrived with him, not literal storms, though the Highland monastery was often visited by rain and mountain winds. These were human storms, fears that stirred, anger that brewed, pain that poured from weary pilgrims like summer rain through cracked earth. Somehow, whenever someone's soul was most unsettled, they would find themselves sitting beside Koji, and Koji would smile. He rarely spoke, but people left changed, not always healed, but softened, less afraid of the storm within. One afternoon, a young man named Hiro climbed the temple path. His clothes were fine but dirty, his shoes broken from the climb. He was not a monk, nor a seeker of truth. He came because life had betrayed him. His company dissolved, his marriage crumbled, his name sullied by accusations half true, half lies. He came because the city had spat him out. He had nothing left but the noise in his chest. That afternoon, the sky was clear, but Hiro felt the thunder anyway. He wandered into the monastery, past chanting monks and ringing bells, and slumped onto a stone bench near the garden wall. He buried his face in his hands, and then he noticed it, a presence, a quiet warmth beside him, and a smile. He looked up. An old monk sat just a few feet away, back straight, hands resting, eyes half-lidded in peace. Koji. Hiro sniffed bitterly. Are you going to tell me everything happens for a reason? Koji said nothing, just smiled. Hiro scoffed. I've lost everything. Reason doesn't mean much when your name is dirt. Still, the monk remained silent. Annoyed, Hiro threw a pebble across the garden. Why do you sit there like that? Why do you smile like you've never been angry in your life? Koji opened his eyes a little, met Hiro's gaze, and then, softly, his smile widened. Not mockery, not superiority, just a knowing kindness. Something inside Hiro cracked. He had been shouted at, pitied, judged, but no one had smiled at his pain before. I hate this, he whispered. I hate how I feel. I hate what I've become. Koji finally spoke. Just one sentence. Then smile at the storm. Reflection. Smiling at the storm's end does not promise that storms will pass quickly. It does not teach denial or detachment as escape. Instead, it offers a way to stand in the rain with awareness, even tenderness. To smile at the storm is not to mock it. It is to recognize that you are not the storm. Koji's smile was not a sign of ignorance or spiritual bypassing. It was the quiet wisdom of one who had weathered many inner tempests and realized this: what passes through you is not who you are. When the wind howls in your mind, grief, rage, confusion, you can learn to sit like Koji. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to believe it. You only need to remain awake, grounded, kind, psychological insight, emotional regulation, and mindful presence. In modern psychology, emotional storms are often viewed as dysregulation, sudden, overwhelming states where fear, shame, or anger hijack our ability to think clearly. Most of us try to suppress these states or get swept up in them. But mindful awareness, like Koji's smile, is a middle path. By observing emotions without judgment, we activate the prefrontal cortex, creating space between feeling and reaction. This isn't passive, it is active compassion toward ourselves and what arises within. Studies in compassion-focused therapy show that holding painful feelings with a gentle inner gaze dramatically reduces reactivity and increases resilience. Koji's smile was a living metaphor for this gentle gaze. He taught with presence, not instruction. Closing meditation. Your inner Koji tonight. When emotions stir or thoughts spiral, sit quietly. Picture an old monk in your mind, not to escape, but to remember that inside you too lives a Koji, a quiet place that can witness the storm without becoming it. Ask yourself, what part of me can smile at this without needing to fix it? Can I allow the storm to pass through without collapsing into it? As the Buddha said, you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. And yet, you are not the anger, you are not the fear, you are the stillness that watches, you are the smile in the storm. Breathe, let it come, let it pass, remain. Story 4. The Pebble in the Shoe. He only noticed it halfway through the mountain trail. At first, it was nothing more than a faint pressure, a slight irregularity beneath his heel, like a folded thread or a wrinkle in his sock. The sun was rising over the east ridge, golden light spilling across the pines. Birds sang, wind whispered, and still he walked. But the pressure remained. He shifted his weight forward to his toes, then leaned back more on his arch. But by the time he reached the ridge overlook, it had grown into something sharper, persistent, subtle, but insistent, like a whisper that would not leave him alone. It was a pebble, a single, ordinary, unremarkable pebble. The monk stopped walking. He exhaled. He could have taken his shoe off and shaken it free, but he did not. Not yet. Instead, he stared out over the valley, morning mist curling through the trees like breath. Below, the temple roofs curved like waves of stillness, and beyond them, distant villages dotted the land like quiet intentions. He thought of how far he had walked in life before ever noticing the small things that hurt him. Years ago, before the mountain, before the robe, before silence found him, he had been an apprentice to a scholar in the city. He had been quick-minded, proud, and eager to please. He copied scrolls flawlessly, anticipated instructions before they were spoken. People praised him. His master, however, was hard to read, stoic, disciplined, spare with compliments. One day, after months of work, the young apprentice made a small error, a reversed character in a sacred text. It was corrected easily, but the master said only, "Sloppiness begins with the smallest crack." He had not forgotten that phrase. It lived in his mind like a stone. He never made the same mistake again, but he also never truly exhaled again. From then on, he checked everything twice, then a third time. He rewrote letters. He flinched when others spoke sternly. He feared missteps more than he loved learning. And so the crack widened quietly, not in his work, but in his spirit, until one day, after a single late-night error in a ceremony scroll, the master dismissed him. No harshness, just silence. The boy packed his things, but he took something with him that would not fit in his bag, a pebble in his soul. Now, all these years later, on the edge of a mist-filled valley, the monk sat on a stone and removed his sandal. There it was, so small, not sharp, barely noticeable to the eye. Yet it had altered his walk, stiffened his ankle, shifted his gait, made each step just a little more guarded. He placed the pebble in his palm and turned it slowly. How many steps had he taken while pretending it wasn't there? Reflection. The hidden pain. We tend to think of suffering as something large, dramatic, and easily named. Grief, illness, loss. But often, the pain that shapes us most is small and unspoken, like a pebble in the shoe. Single comment from childhood. A glance of disapproval. A subtle rejection. A silence that came when we needed words. We carry these with us, tucked deep inside our emotional gate. We adapt our behavior. We overcompensate. We avoid. We brace. And, over time, we begin to forget the original wound. We just know that walking hurts. In Zen, mindfulness invites us to stop and feel, not to dramatize, but to become aware, to pause mid-step, remove the metaphorical shoe, and gently ask, what am I still carrying that no longer belongs? The answer is not always obvious. The pebble is often disguised. It may appear as perfectionism, anxiety, withdrawal, chronic tension. But when we look with kindness, we begin to see that it is not who we are. It is something we stepped on long ago and never noticed. Psychological insight, microtraumas and emotional armor. Modern psychology recognizes the power of what is, called microtrauma, small but repeated emotional injuries that accumulate over time. Unlike major traumas, these subtle wounds often go unacknowledged, yet shape behavior deeply. The internalized fear of making mistakes, the overthinking born from never feeling enough, the chronic self-censorship rooted in early shame. These pebbles in the psyche slowly create emotional armor. We become cautious, controlled, sometimes even numb, but armor is heavy, and eventually it stops protecting us and starts defining us. Healing begins not with a grand revelation, but with noticing the discomfort, the patterns, the tension in the shoulders, the tightening in the chest when we hear certain words. The body remembers, and the soul waits patiently for us to sit down, unlace the old narrative, and remove the pebble. Closing meditation. Releasing the pebble tonight. Before sleep. Bring your attention to the body. Find a quiet place. Sit or lie down gently. Let your breath be unhurried. Scan yourself from head to toe. Not to fix, but to feel. Where is the pressure? Where is the tightness? What has been aching for attention, but you've been too busy to notice? Then ask, with gentleness, what pebble have I been walking with, pretending not to feel? Let the question float like mist. You don't need to answer it tonight. You only need to notice that something is there. That noticing itself is healing. As the Buddha said, pain is certain, but suffering is optional. The pebble is real, but so is your choice to remove it. And once you do, the path becomes lighter, not easier, but more yours. Rest well, dear traveler. There is still far to walk, but now, perhaps with softer steps. Story 5. The Lantern That Forgot to Burn. Long ago, in a village nestled between forests and fog, there lived a lantern keeper. Each evening, as the sun melted into the hills and the mist crept over rooftops, she walked the winding paths with steady hands, lighting the lanterns that lined the narrow roads and temple courtyards. Her light was the first warmth after dusk, a quiet promise that the night would not swallow everything whole. Her name was Akari. It meant light. And for many years, that is what she gave. People in the village adored her. The elderly would smile as she passed. Children would chase the flickering glow from her flame. Young lovers would linger under the lanterns she lit, whispering secrets by firelight. Akari never missed a night, until one evening she did. The storm had been long and merciless. Rain had lashed the rooftops for days. Wind had torn branches from trees like paper. And through it all, Akari continued her work. Hood drawn low, boots soaked, hands trembling but precise. But after the third day, something in her changed. It wasn't visible, not at first. She still walked the paths, still carried the pole and the oil. But one by one, the lanterns remained dark. She would approach each one, stare at it, then move on without lifting the flame. No one noticed at first. The storm had driven most indoors. But when the clouds cleared and the moon returned to its perch above the village, the roads remained dark. People asked questions. Is she ill? Did she fall? Was she struck by lightning? But she was not ill, nor missing. She was seen walking the same path, night after night, as if her memory remembered. But her hands had forgotten. The lanterns were there. The oil was full, but Akari no longer lit them. She had become the lantern that forgot to burn. A young boy named Kenji was the first to ask her directly. He waited near the old stone bridge one evening, watching her approach. Her robe was patched, her face pale. In her hand, the flame danced quietly in its casing. "Miss Akari," he said gently, "you forgot this one." She paused, looked up. The lantern swayed above her, untouched. "I didn't forget," she said. Kenji tilted his head. "Then why didn't you light it?" Her voice was quiet. "Because I'm tired. And maybe I don't believe it matters anymore." She looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of hollow resignation. "I've carried this light for so long, for others, for the village, but no one ever asked if it was heavy." Kenji blinked. "You mean the flame?" She smiled weakly. "No, the silence, reflection, the burnout of the soul. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from the body. It is deeper, quieter. It comes from being the one who holds light for everyone else, without ever being asked how your own fire is doing." Akari had lit the way for others for years. But somewhere along the path, she lost contact with the flame inside her. She moved through the motions, smiled when expected, carried the tools, fulfilled the role. But what once was love became habit. What once was purpose became weight. This is the suffering of the unseen caregiver, the silent helper, the light bearer who forgets their own right to rest. In Zen, we are reminded that the source of light is not the flame, but the awareness behind it. The lantern burns only when tended to, when the oil is replenished, when the match is struck, when intention meets breath. When we ignore the flame inside us for too long, we may keep moving, but the light fades. To serve others is noble, but to abandon ourselves in the name of service is not enlightenment. It is erasure. Psychological insight, compassion, fatigue and identity. Loss, modern psychology calls this compassion fatigue, a form of burnout experienced by those who continually give without receiving, listen without being heard, care without being cared for. It is common among therapists, healthcare workers, teachers, and anyone who feels responsible for the emotional well-being of others. It begins with noble intent, but over time, if unbalanced, it drains vitality, and the person begins to feel invisible, robotic, numb. Akari was not lazy, she was empty, and the tragedy is that those around her only notice the absence of her light, not the fading of her soul. This is also called role fatigue when we become so identified with what we do for others. We lose touch with who we are without the role. If we are always the helper, we forget how to ask for help. If we are always the light, we forget how to be held in the dark. Closing meditation, reclaiming the inner flame tonight, before sleep, bring your attention to this question. Where have I been holding light for others, but forgetting to tend my own flame? Sit quietly, breathe gently, feel into the parts of you that are tired, but haven't said so. The parts that say, I'm fine, when they're not. The parts that move through life like Akari, present, but extinguished. Let this be your permission to pause, as the Buddha said, you, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe deserve your love and affection. Light cannot be given if it is not sustained. You are not a lantern built for endless burning. You are a living flame, gentle, luminous, sacred. Rest now, and when you are ready, you will light again. Not because you must, but because you want to. Story 6. The tea that poured too much. There is a story that every Zen student hears eventually, a story of a proud scholar and a humble master, of a teacup that overflowed, and a lesson that arrived not through words, but through silence and spill. But this is not that story, this is what happened after. The scholar, whose name was Haru, returned home that day with wet sleeves and a disturbed heart. He had travelled far to meet the master and ask questions that weighed on him. Questions about suffering, attachment, impermanence. Instead, the master had poured tea until it spilled over the cup, soaking the floor, his clothes, the table. When Haru objected, the master had said, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions. Until you empty yourself, how can I offer anything?" And that was all. No answers, no teachings. Just hot tea and a closed door. Haru walked down the mountain in silence. The following weeks were difficult. His pride burned, his mind resisted. But something deeper, quiet and persistent, began to stir. A discomfort, not with the master, but with himself. What did it mean to be full? He began to notice. He interrupted others before they finished speaking. He filled pauses with facts. When someone cried, he offered advice before presence. When asked to listen, he planned his response. Even in silence, his mind poured endlessly. Judgments, explanations, fears, plans. he realized something unnerving. He had never stopped pouring. Months passed. Haru returned to the mountain, not to argue, but to observe. The master allowed him to stay, said little, assigned no tasks, offered no guidance. But each morning they drank tea. And each morning Haru watched the master pour, precisely, gently, never spilling a drop. His movements were unhurried, reverent. One day, Haru asked, "How do you know when to stop?" The master looked at him. "Because I don't pour with the hand," he said. "I pour with the eye and with the heart." Haru frowned. "I don't understand." The master smiled. "That's because your cup is still pouring while mine is still." Reflection. The overflowing mind, we often think of fullness as a blessing. Full shelves, full schedules, full lives. But there is a kind of fullness that suffocates, a mental clutter that drowns clarity, a psychological habit of overfilling every space with noise, opinions, plans, reactions. The cup that overflows is not the cup's fault. It is the pourer who does not know stillness. In Zen, beginner's mind is praised not because it knows little, but because it remains empty enough to receive. Emptiness here is not a lack, but a readiness, a willingness to see without filters, to listen without interruption, to allow what is. To live with awareness is not to pour constantly, but to pause between each act, to feel the space between thought and response, to let the cup be half full and know it is enough. Psychological insight. Cognitive overload and control psychology speaks of cognitive overload, the state where the brain is constantly processing, evaluating, predicting, correcting. This state is often praised in high achievers, but over time, it leads to anxiety, burnout, and emotional disconnection. Many of us are taught to add in order to improve. More books, more skills, more productivity. But rarely are we taught the value of subtraction, letting go of needing to know, releasing the urgency to speak, accepting not having the last word. This is where healing begins, not in more strategies, but in space, the spaciousness of not pouring, the breath between reactions. When we are always pouring, we don't notice what we've spilled. Closing meditation, emptying the cup tonight before sleep. Imagine yourself as a teacup. Close your eyes. Sit upright, like a vessel. Let your breath rise and fall, slow and warm. Now ask, what have I been pouring today that I never needed to? Where have I overflowed? Into others, into moments, into silence, without awareness. Visualize yourself gently tilting, releasing just enough to feel light again, as the Buddha said. To empty yourself is to find your original nature. Emptiness is not hollow, it is whole. It is the space in which wisdom can land softly. Rest now, let the teacup cool, let the mind settle, and in that stillness may you remember, you are not the pour, you are the presence that chooses when to begin and when to stop. Story 7. The Empty Chair. There was a chair in the far corner of the zendo that no one ever used. It was old, made of dark wood, polished by time and touch. The cushions had flattened from years of silent weight. The backrest curved slightly, like a spine that had listened to too many stories. No one could remember who had brought it in, or when. It was just always there, and it was always empty. Visitors occasionally asked, "Is that for someone important? Does the master use it? Is it reserved?" The monks would only smile, and still it remained, waiting, patient, untouched. Until one day, a man came who could not sit on the floor. He arrived during the rainy season. His name was Ray, and he walked with a limp. Not from injury, but from something deeper. Something age had settled into his bones like dust in an unused room. He had once been a schoolteacher. He had once loved music. He had once believed in many things. Now he believed in almost nothing. He came not for answers, but for silence. And when the other visitors folded themselves into meditation postures on cushions and mats, Ray stood at the edge of the room, unsure. That's when the abbot, without a word, gestured toward the corner. The chair. Ray hesitated. Something in him resisted. Perhaps pride, perhaps fear of being seen, perhaps shame at needing what others didn't, but the chair did not judge. It offered itself quietly, fully, without condition. So he sat, and for the first time in decades, he did not try to become anything other than what he was. He returned the next day, and the next. The monks never spoke to him. They didn't need to. He sat in the chair like it had been waiting for him all along. In the stillness, he began to notice things. The rhythm of his breath, the way his mind wandered, then softened. The ache in his hip, the warmth in his chest when the bell rang. The small, flickering light that hadn't gone out, even after all this time. The empty chair had made space for him, and in doing so, he made space for himself. Reflection. The sacredness of space. We live in a world that values fullness, filled calendars, packed rooms, busy minds. But healing often begins in emptiness, in the quiet corner, the pause in the sentence, the silence that holds instead of speaks. The empty chair was not empty because it lacked purpose. It was sacred because it held potential. In Zen, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. The cushion may be soft, but it means nothing unless it holds you. The chair may be plain, but it becomes sacred the moment someone sits with presence. We too need places where we do not have to prove ourselves. Places that do not demand performance. Places that say, come exactly as you are, and sit. Psychological insight, safe space and self-acceptance. In therapy, we speak of psychological safety, the feeling of being seen without being judged, of being allowed to feel without being fixed. Many people go their whole lives without ever sitting in such a space. Ray did not heal because someone gave him answers. He healed because he stopped pretending to be someone he was not. The chair did not ask him to be enlightened. It only asked him to be honest. This is the beginning of emotional integration, not perfection, but permission. Permission to hurt, to feel, to be real. When we stop trying to sit like everyone else, we finally begin to sit like ourselves. Closing meditation. Finding your chair tonight. Before you sleep, picture an empty chair. Place it in your mind's eye. Not a throne, not a stage, just a chair, a quiet space waiting for you. Now ask, where in my life do I still stand outside the room, afraid to take my seat? What part of me believes I must earn rest or prove worthiness before I can simply be? Then, slowly, imagine yourself sitting, not because you are ready, not because you are perfect, but because the chair is ready for you. As the Buddha said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The empty chair waits inside you, and in sitting down, you return to what has always been yours. A place in this moment, a place in your own presence, a place to rest without apology. You don't need to be more. You only need to arrive. Story 8. The river that refused to flow. There was once a river that stopped. It wasn't blocked by debris or frozen by snow. No dam held it back. No drought dried its banks. It simply refused. Where once it had run with clear, joyful purpose, carving valleys, feeding soil, reflecting sky, it now sat, still and heavy. The water darkened. Fish moved slower. The reeds along its edges began to whisper in dry tones. Villagers who had depended on the river whispered too. They said it was cursed, that the gods were angry, that the river had grown old and tired and turned its back on the world. But the river knew the truth. It wasn't tired of flowing. It was tired of being pulled in too many directions. High in the mountains, where the river had first begun as a trickle from snowmelt, the waters were once free. They danced through rocks, tumbled through narrow paths, and sang to no one but the sky. But over time, the river had been named, measured, harnessed. It had been split, diverted into fields, siphoned for factories, channeled into controlled paths with stone walls and metal gates. Its freedom became function. And though it still appeared to flow, something inside had stopped. It remembered the day a concrete canal was built through one of the villages. A worker had patted the wall and said, "Now the river will behave." That word echoed. Behave. One morning, a monk came to the river. He was old, but light on his feet. His robe was patched with years. His eyes carried the kind of stillness that made birds unafraid. He had heard of the river's silence and came not to fix it, but to listen. He sat by the edge, dipped his fingers in and whispered, "Are you resting or resisting?" The river said nothing, so the monk closed his eyes and waited. He stayed there for 7 days, eating only rice, drinking only the stagnant water, watching the sun rise and fall. On the 8th day, he finally spoke again. "You are not broken," he said to the water. "You are grieving." And then the river stirred, just slightly, just enough. Reflection. The resistance to flow, like the river. We are meant to move, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, internally. Our nature is not static. We feel, we evolve, we shift like tides. But somewhere along the way, life begins to channel us. Expectations, roles, demands. We are told to behave, to be useful, efficient, productive. Flow becomes performance. Joy becomes function. Self-expression becomes self-management. And then something inside us stops. We may still appear to move, to work, to speak, to show up. But within, the waters become heavy, still, resistant. This is not failure, it is grief. The grief of forgetting our own shape, of being stretched too thin, of being diverted too far from where we began. Psychological insight, emotional suppression, and somatic freeze in trauma psychology. This phenomenon is akin to the freeze response, when the nervous system, overwhelmed by prolonged stress, no longer fights or flees but shuts down. It is a biological pause, a full-body resistance to more input. This isn't laziness, it's a form of preservation. The modern mind often misunderstands emotional resistance. We push ourselves to keep going, stay strong, be consistent. But the psyche needs more than momentum. It needs safety. It needs integration. Like the river, we don't stop flowing because we're weak. We stop because we're lost. or because no one has listened to the part of us that longs to change direction. Closing meditation, returning to your flow tonight. Before you sleep, sit quietly with this question. Where in my life have I stopped flowing? Not because I want to, but because I've been pulled too far from myself. Close your eyes, breathe into your chest. Feel if there is tightness, heaviness, stillness. Not all stillness is peace. Some is pause. Some is self-protection. Now, without judgment, say to yourself, it's okay to rest. It's okay to grieve. I will find my way back. As the Buddha said, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame. But even rocks are shaped by water, and rivers remember. So let yourself soften. Let the water inside you remember how to move. Not fast, not perfectly, just again. And when you do, the reeds will sway, the light will return, and the river that once refused to flow will find its path once more. Story 9. The Master's Single Breath. There was once a master who was known not for his words, but for a single breath. He lived atop a quiet hill, not far from the sea, in a temple made of weathered wood and silence. Travelers came from great distances to ask him questions about enlightenment, fear, desire, the meaning of suffering. He welcomed them all, but rarely did he speak. Instead, he breathed. Not the kind of breath that comes and goes unnoticed, but one deliberate, sacred whole breath. In, out, and then silence. At first, the students were confused. Some wept. Some grew angry. Some left. But the ones who stayed, who listened not with the ears but with the body, began to hear what no words could carry. One morning a scholar arrived. He had studied all the sutras, translated the old Sanskrit chants, debated with abbots in 5 monasteries. His robes were pristine, his back straight, his voice precise. He bowed deeply. Master, I seek the truth beyond form. I have read, recited, renounced, yet peace escapes me. Teach me, I beg you. The master smiled. Then he inhaled and exhaled. Just once, then silence. The scholar waited. 10 seconds, a minute, 5. Frustrated, he said, I did not come all this way to observe your lungs. I came for teaching. The master gestured gently toward the sea below. Do you hear the waves? He said. The scholar listened. Indeed, the waves were crashing softly, rhythmically, endlessly. Yes, he said. The master nodded. Then you already understand. Reflection. The truth in one breath. We live in a world of endless words, explanations, debates, interpretations. We chase truth in theories, dissect it in essays, pursue it like a prize to be earned. But truth, in its most profound form, is not carried by language. It lives in presence. The master's single breath was not empty. It was everything. It was the entire teaching of impermanence, the inhale, the arising of form, the exhale, the release, the pause, the return to stillness. Over and over again, life's rhythm encoded in a single cycle. One breath contains the universe. It holds the birth and death of thought, the crest and fall of desire, the expansion and surrender of self. To breathe with full awareness is not passive. It is awakening, psychological insight, the power of one conscious breath in. Trauma recovery and mindfulness-based therapies. The breath is often used not just as a calming tool, but as an anchor to the present, a safe and neutral place to return when the mind is overwhelmed. One conscious breath lowers cortisol levels. It slows the heart rate. It interrupts the loop of anxiety. But more than that, it returns us to our own authority. In a world that fragments attention, the breath reclaims our inner space. You cannot breathe for the past. You cannot breathe for the future. You can only breathe here. And if you do so with attention, even once, you have touched something sacred. Closing. Meditation. A breath for truth tonight. Before sleep, lie down and let your body soften. Place one hand on your chest, the other on your belly. Now breathe, not to control, not to perform, just to arrive. Inhale gently. Feel the breath fill your palm. Exhale slowly. Let the air fall away, and now ask, what truth have I been chasing that might already live in this breath? What question can I stop asking simply by being? As the Buddha said, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. Perhaps peace is not found in knowing more, but in remembering what you already are. And what are you? You are this moment, this breath, this simple, miraculous inhale, and its quiet return. Breathe. Nothing else is required. Story 10. The child inside the bell. There was a bell in the temple that no longer rang. It hung in the garden's far corner, suspended between two beams of fragrant cedar. Time had tarnished its surface with green lichen and soft rust. A small crack ran down its side, so fine it could barely be seen, but enough that the monks had stopped using it. No one remembered who had cast it, or when it had last been struck. Yet they called it the bell of the child, and visitors often stood before it, silent and curious, as if waiting for something long forgotten to be heard again. It is said that sometimes, if you listened carefully, not with ears but with memory, you could hear a voice inside the silence, a child's breath, a child's longing, a sound not of bronze, but of heartbreak. Jun had come to the temple seeking peace. He was 38, a quiet man with quiet hands, the kind who did not take up much space in the world. He worked in numbers, in spreadsheets, in hours marked by deadlines. His life was tidy, efficient, safe. But lately, something had begun to unravel. He could not name it. He only felt it. A sudden sadness when hearing certain music, tightness in the chest when he saw children playing, dreams of running through empty hallways calling a name he couldn't remember. So he came to the temple, not because he believed in anything, but because he needed a place where the questions could simply breathe. One morning, after Zazen, Jun wandered alone into the bell garden. He was drawn to the old bell without knowing why. He touched its surface, cold, rough, familiar in a way that made no sense. He closed his eyes, and he heard it. Not the bell. The memory. A child's voice. His own. Sobbing behind a locked door. Small fists pounding on wood. A woman's voice yelling. A man's voice silent. Then nothing. Jun staggered back, his breath caught in his throat. He hadn't remembered that in over 30 years. He returned to the bell the next day, and the next, not to pray, not to search, just to listen. More memories came. A broken toy, hiding in closets, holding his breath so long he nearly fainted. A sense that his feelings were too loud, too much, too inconvenient. He realized something painful. He had learned not to ring. Somewhere, along the way, he had silenced his own voice. not because he was weak, but because silence had once kept him safe. Reflection. The silenced inner child. We all have a bell inside us. It is forged in childhood, cast from laughter, fear, longing, and wonder. When rung, it vibrates with life, with emotion, with authenticity. But for many, the bell grows quiet. Sometimes it is cracked by trauma, sometimes muted by shame, sometimes buried under the weight of being told to grow up, be strong, stop crying, and so the child retreats, not in age, but in spirit. We become adults who function, perform, produce. But somewhere inside, the bell has stopped ringing, yet it is still there. Waiting. Psychological insight, reparenting, and emotional integration in inner child therapy. We speak of reparenting, the process of reconnecting with the wounded child within us, not to regress, but to heal. This child is not immature. It is the part of us that holds our most honest emotional truths. June's grief was not irrational. It was ancestral, stored, suppressed, still alive in his nervous system. Healing begins not by fixing the child, but by sitting beside him, by listening to the bell, even when it cracks. The pain we carry from childhood is not weakness. It is unprocessed experience, waiting for presence. When we acknowledge the child, we restore the voice we lost, and sometimes the bell rings again. Closing meditation. Hearing the inner bell tonight before sleep, place your hand gently over your heart. Breathe slowly, gently. Now imagine a bell. It does not need to be large. It does not need to be whole. Just imagine it, resting quietly within you. Now ask, what did I need to say as a child but no one heard? What part of me still longs to be held, not corrected? Do not rush an answer. Just listen. Even silence has tone. As the Buddha said, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Tonight, perhaps the word you need comes, not from your mouth, but from your memory, from the bell inside you. Let it ring, softly, honestly, enough to remember who you were and who you still are. You are not broken. You are just waiting to be heard. Story 11. The Mirror That Didn't Lie. In the far room of a forgotten temple, there was a mirror that no one dared look into for long. It was framed in blackened oak, worn smooth by decades of quiet fingers, and leaned against a wall no monk dusted. Often, though the temple was simple, this mirror was ancient, older than the floor it rested on, older than the teachings it had overheard. No one knew where it came from, no one claimed it, yet everyone respected it, because this mirror did not show what you wanted to see. It showed everything. Visitors passed through, curious and bright with questions. Many stopped in front of it out of habit, the way one might glance at any mirror. But when they met their own reflection, they quickly looked away. Some saw themselves younger or older. Some saw no face at all. Some cried. A few laughed hollowly. But the bravest stayed, and what they saw was not a trick of light or angle. They saw what they had tried to forget. One autumn, a woman named Kana came to the temple. She was composed, well-spoken, careful in every way, a counselor, admired and praised for her kindness and clarity. She helped others untangle their grief, taught children how to name emotions, guided couples through silence and rupture. But inside, she was growing tired. Not from the work, but from the pretense. From the constant effort of holding everything for everyone else, while hiding her own confusion. She did not cry anymore. She did not break. She did not feel much at all. So she came, hoping to sit in stillness, to breathe, to untangle something. She did not expect the mirror. It was on her third day at the temple that she noticed it. Late afternoon light poured through a rice paper screen, illuminating the mirror's dusty glass. She stood in front of it, meaning only to adjust her shawl, and then she stopped. The reflection stared back. Familiar, yes, but also strange. Her eyes looked deeper somehow. Not wider, but heavier. There was a tension in her mouth she hadn't noticed before, a weariness in her neck, a quiet scream behind the calm, and then something inside her cracked. She remembered the night she found out her father had died, how she had hung up the phone, washed the dishes, and answered 2 emails before letting the news register. How even then she didn't cry. How it scared her. How easy it was to act unfazed. She stared at her reflection and whispered, "Who are you when no one needs you to be strong?" The mirror did not answer, but it did not look away. Reflection, seeing without defenses. We wear faces not only for others, but for ourselves. Masks of capability, masks of maturity, masks of "I'm fine." Sometimes they are needed. They protect. They allow us to function in painful environments. But over time, the mask grows tight. It fuses with our skin. We forget where it ends and where we begin. The mirror that didn't lie showed more than wrinkles or tiredness. It revealed the disconnection that occurs when the self becomes a performance. To truly look at ourselves without distortion, without avoidance, is one of the hardest acts of courage, but it is also the beginning of freedom. Psychological insight. Dissociation and emotional numbing. In psychology, we speak of dissociation, a mechanism by which the mind distances itself from pain. Over time, this can become a chronic pattern. Emotions blunted, memories hazy, identity fragmented. People like Kana, high-functioning and helpful, are often praised for their strength, but beneath that strength may lie unacknowledged loss, exhaustion, and disconnection from authentic feeling. Healing begins not with more performance, but with presence. To look into the mirror, not of glass, but of truth, and say, "I see you. I've missed you. You're still here." This is how the self is restored. Not by becoming better, but by becoming whole. Closing meditation. Meeting yourself. Gently tonight before you sleep, dim the lights. Find a mirror. Not to fix your hair, not to criticize, but to meet the one behind your own eyes. Gaze softly, gently. Now ask, what part of me have I not allowed to be seen? Who am I when I am not trying to be anything for anyone? Let the answer come slowly. There may be sadness, there may be silence, but also relief. As the Buddha said, the most important journey is the journey inward. The mirror does not lie, but it also does not judge. It waits for you to return, not as the perfect version, but as the honest one. Breathe and say, if only in your heart, "I see you. I'm listening. Welcome back." Story 12. The Bamboo That Bowed. In the back of the temple garden, beyond the koi pond and the rows of moss-covered stones, there grew a grove of bamboo. It wasn't planted in neat rows like a farmer's crop. It grew wild, natural, as if the wind itself had planted it. Tall stalks reached skyward with graceful strength, each one bending slightly under its own height, swaying with every breeze like silent monks in morning prayer. The monks rarely tended to it. They didn't need to. The bamboo took care of itself. But when storms came, it was always the bamboo that remained. The pines broke. The brittle trees splintered. The heavier limbs snapped, but the bamboo bent, and in bending, it survived. There was a young monk named Taro who struggled with this. He had been in the monastery for only a year, earnest, disciplined, intense in a way that came not from ego, but from pain. He practiced longer than others, fasted more often, and always sat in the front row during sutra recitation. He believed that to be spiritual meant to be strong, to never falter, to never bend. So when his teacher corrected him in public, gently, without shame, Taro felt something inside him twist. Not because the correction was cruel, but because it revealed the part of him that still feared being wrong. He bowed, he smiled, he accepted the feedback. But that night, he could not sleep. His chest was tight, his thoughts loud. Something old and hidden had been touched, like a bruise under the surface of his stillness. Unable to rest, he went outside. The moon was high, casting silver light across the garden. He walked without direction until he found himself before the bamboo grove. A breeze moved through it, soft but insistent. The stalks bent, not a little, but far, as if the wind would break them. But then the wind passed, and the bamboo stood again. Unbroken, Taro stood there a long time. Eventually he whispered, "How do you do that?" The bamboo said nothing, but it did not need to. It bowed again, as if in answer. Reflection, the strength in yielding. In many cultures, we are taught that strength is found in resistance. Stand firm. Be unshakable. Hold your ground. But in Zen, strength is not stiffness, it is resilience. The bamboo survives not because it resists the wind, but because it dances with it. It knows the storm is not permanent. It trusts the root even when the stalk bends low. Taro believed that to be spiritual meant to be invulnerable. But true spirituality allows itself to be moved. To bend is not to break. It is to remain connected to the earth, to the moment, to what is real. Psychological insight, the trap of perfection and emotional rigidity. Many who seek healing or mastery, whether in spiritual practice or personal growth, fall into the trap of emotional rigidity. We equate progress with control. We believe emotions are weaknesses. We fear that if we yield, we'll collapse. But psychology teaches that emotional flexibility is a key marker of mental health. Rigidity, by contrast, often masks trauma. It comes from a place of fear. The fear that if we soften, we'll be consumed. That if we admit vulnerability, we'll lose authority. Yet what is more powerful than the one who can weep and still stand? What is more trustworthy than the person who can admit, "I was wrong," and keep walking? To bend is not failure. It is the wisdom to live through the storm. Closing meditation, becoming the bamboo tonight. Before sleep, lie still. Feel your body. Feel where it is stiff. In your shoulders, your jaw, your chest. Now breathe into those places, not to force them to release, but to befriend them. And ask, where have I been holding myself so tightly that I've forgotten how to bend? What part of me fears being seen as soft, or wrong, or moved? As the Buddha said, In the end, only three things matter: how well you lived, how well you loved, and how well you learned to let go. Let the breath move through you like wind through bamboo. Let the past move through you. Let the correction pass through you. Let the grief move and return you to yourself. You will not break. You were never meant to be stiff like stone. You were meant to bend and rise again. Story 13. The Mountain That Walked Away. In the heart of an ancient valley, there once stood a mountain that everyone believed would never move. It towered above the village like a silent guardian, solid, shadowed, unmoving. Generations grew old, watching it. Children drew it in their first ink paintings. Elders prayed to it. Lovers swore promises before it. It was the mountain, and mountains do not walk away. Until one day, it did. It did not crumble. It did not collapse. It did not erupt or disappear. It simply shifted. Not physically, but in presence. It no longer felt like the same mountain. Travelers stopped at the valley and looked up, confused. "Is this it?" they asked. "It seems different." Villagers nodded, but said little. They could feel it too. The mountain that once demanded reverence now seemed softer, quieter, almost absent, and no one could explain why. At the foot of that mountain lived an old man named Haruto. He had spent his whole life identifying with that mountain. Solid, predictable, the one others leaned on. The one who never cried, never paused, never doubted. People came to him for strength, and he gave it, even when his wife died, even when his son left without a word, even when the nights grew long and silent. He did not waver. Until one morning, he didn't get out of bed. Not because he was sick, but because he could no longer pretend to be unmoved. He lay there and whispered, "I'm tired of being the mountain." And somewhere in the sky above, the mountain exhaled. From that day on, something inside Haruto shifted. He stopped giving advice he didn't feel. He stopped nodding when he disagreed. He started saying, "I don't know," more often. At first, people were unsettled. "Are you all right?" they asked. "You seem different." He smiled and said, "Yes, I think I'm beginning." Beginning what? They wondered. But he didn't answer, because it wasn't a sentence. It was a letting go, a mountain stepping down from its pedestal and learning to walk like a man again. Reflection: the burden of being unshakable. There is a quiet suffering that comes from being seen as the strong one. It begins as a compliment. "You're so reliable. You're always calm. Nothing ever gets to you." And we wear these labels like armor. But over time, strength becomes isolation. Calm becomes suppression. Unshakable becomes unreachable. In Zen, the mountain is revered not for its immobility, but for its presence, its witnessing. But presence must be alive, must feel, must respond. To be a mountain is not to be numb. It is to hold space without becoming stone. Haruto's awakening was not dramatic. It was honest. He realized that his strength had become performance, that he missed being human, and in choosing to soften, he became real. Psychological insight, role fatigue, and the myth of Stoicism. Psychology speaks of role fatigue, a subtle erosion that happens when we identify too strongly with a particular persona: the fixer, the provider, the strong one. It often emerges in caregivers, leaders, parents, or those raised to suppress emotion in favor of functionality. The nervous system may adapt for decades, but eventually it seeks truth, And truth doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like tears. Sometimes it sounds like, I can't keep carrying this. When the psyche finally speaks, it does not ask us to collapse. It asks us to step down, to set down the stone cloak and let ourselves be carried, if only for a while. Closing meditation. Setting down the mountain. Tonight before sleep, breathe deeply. Feel the weight you've been carrying, not the physical, but the invisible, the emotional labor, the unspoken responsibility, the pressure to remain composed. Now ask, where have I mistaken strength for silence? What part of me wants to walk away from the mountain and return to being soft, fallible, whole? Place your hands over your heart, not to hold it together, but to honor what it's held for so long. As the Buddha said, you only lose what you cling to. You are not the mountain. You are the wind that touches it, the rain that nourishes it, the traveler who walks beside it and says, this, too, can move. And sometimes the greatest wisdom is not in holding your ground, but in knowing when to leave it. Story 14. The bird that forgot to sing. There was once a bird who forgot how to sing. It was not sudden. No storm stole her voice. No predator silenced her with fear. No cage clipped her wings. She simply stopped. Each morning she perched as she always had, on the same slender branch outside the old bell tower, watching the light stretch across the horizon. Her feathers ruffled gently in the breeze. Her chest rose and fell. Her eyes blinked slowly, dreamily. But she made no sound. Other birds called out, bright, chaotic, full of life. Their songs lifted like smoke through the trees. But she remained, quiet, still, silent. It was not that she did not remember her song. She just no longer knew why she should sing it. In the nearby temple, an old monk noticed her. He had watched her for years. She had once been the dawn's first voice, clear, piercing, unafraid. When she stopped singing, he missed her more than he expected. He didn't speak of it. He simply noticed the absence the way one notices when a clock stops ticking. The quiet isn't loud, it's just unsettling. One morning, he brought his tea to the garden and sat beneath her tree. You haven't sung in a long time, he said softly. The bird tilted her head. I used to time my breath with your voice, he whispered. Now I hold it too long. Still, she said nothing. He smiled. It's all right. I've forgotten things too. That night, as the wind curled through the temple halls and the moon painted silver shadows across the floor, the monk lit a candle and sat in silence. He thought about the bird, and then, quietly, he thought about himself. It had been weeks, no, months, since he had written a poem, years since he'd laughed without caution, decades since he'd wept without explanation. He did not know when he had stopped expressing joy or grief or longing. He too had once sung, not in sound, but in presence, in the way he moved, listened, created, shared. He once saw beauty in small things. Now he often passed them by. The bird had forgotten her song, and so had he. Reflection, when joy becomes dormant. There are seasons of the soul when joy becomes quiet, not absent, not destroyed, just dormant. Like the bird, we go through life fulfilling roles, meeting expectations, appearing functional. But something inside no longer rises to greet the morning with the same music. It is not always depression. Sometimes it is grief, sometimes exhaustion. Sometimes it is the result of carrying too much for too long. In Zen, we are not asked to force joy. but to return to presence, to notice where the light has grown dim, not with shame, but with care. The bird is not wrong for going silent. Sometimes silence is sacred. Sometimes silence is healing. Sometimes silence is how the spirit rests. Psychological insight, anhedonia, and emotional disconnection. In psychology, the term anhedonia describes the state in which a person no longer finds pleasure in things they once loved. It is common in depression, but also in burnout, unresolved grief, and emotional fatigue. It can affect anyone, especially those who have been strong for too long. The bird in this story is not broken. She is weary. She needs not a cure, but a reconnection. The reconnection does not begin with trying harder, but with gentle witnessing, with holding space for the part of us that no longer sings, without demanding performance. When joy feels unreachable, we begin again not by singing, but by listening. Closing meditation, inviting the song, back tonight before sleep. Sit in stillness. Place one hand over your heart. Breathe slowly, not to change anything, just to meet yourself here. Now ask, what part of me has grown quiet? Not out of healing, but out of hiding. When did I last feel joy without needing a reason? Do not rush to answer. Simply wait. As the Buddha said, your work is to discover your work and then with all your heart to give yourself to it. Your song is not gone. It is simply resting beneath the noise. So wait. Be kind. Notice beauty again, without explanation, and when the time is right, you will sing again. Not because you should, but because something inside you remembers what it is to feel the sun on your feathers and the wind in your chest, and joy will rise like breath, unforced, unbidden, unafraid. Story 15. The Fisherman Who Stopped Chasing Fish. There was a fisherman who no longer cast his net. He lived in a small village by the edge of the inland sea, where the water shimmered like glass on windless mornings and turned dark and wild when the storms came. He had fished since he was a boy. His father had fished, and his father before him. The boat had been passed down through generations, its wooden frame worn smooth by salt, time, and calloused hands. The villagers called him Juro. They said no one knew the sea like he did, but one day he stopped. He did not sell his boat. He did not retire. He still rowed out each morning before the sky turned blue. He still sat with his back straight, eyes on the horizon, the ocean stretching out in endless invitation. But he no longer cast his net. People whispered, puzzled. Maybe he's sick. Maybe he's lost his mind. What kind of fisherman doesn't fish? But Juro said nothing. He only smiled quietly, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. One young boy, curious and unafraid, finally asked him, "Uncle, Juro, why do you go out if you don't fish?" Juro looked at the boy, eyes gentle. "I fish," he said softly. "Just not for what you think." The boy frowned. "But you don't bring anything back." Juro looked out over the water. Sometimes not bringing something back is the lesson. Years earlier, Juro had been known for always returning with the best catch. He knew the tide's moods, the hidden currents, the quiet signs of fish beneath the surface. His nets were full, his baskets heavy. People respected him, envied him, depended on him, and he loved it. Not just the fish, but the praise, the purpose, the sense of control. Until one year, the fish stopped coming, no matter what he did. Changing, routes, shifting times, changing bait. His nets came back empty. And the silence of failure, of shame, grew louder than the waves. He grew bitter, resentful. The sea, which once felt like a friend, now felt like an enemy withholding affection. 1. Dawn. He rode farther than ever before, far past the usual grounds, beyond the cliffs where birds nested and the water turned cold. He dropped his net and waited and waited. But still, nothing. So he stopped. He stared down at the glassy water and asked aloud, "What do you want from me?" And in that vast stillness he heard, not with ears, but something deeper. Why must everything you touch be caught? He rode home slowly that day, and the next morning he returned to the water, but left the net untouched. Reflection. The freedom beyond. Outcome. In the world we inhabit, worth is often measured by results. How much you earn, what you produce, what you bring home. Even in healing we ask, how far have you come? What have you fixed? What have you gained? But Zen teaches us to shift the gaze from outcome to awareness. Jiro did not stop fishing because he gave up. He stopped because he realized he had mistaken catching for living. The ocean did not withhold from him. It invited him to be without striving, to rediscover what it meant to sit with the mystery, to be nourished by the presence, not the prize. Psychological insight. Chasing validation and burnout. In psychological terms, many of us are driven by extrinsic motivation, seeking external rewards to affirm internal value. This often begins in childhood. We learn that doing well brings love, approval, safety. Over time, we internalize the chase. We become fishermen in every arena, relationships, careers, even spirituality. We measure our days by what we caught, and when we return empty-handed, we feel unworthy. Jiro's journey is a return to intrinsic presence, a healing of the nervous system's compulsion to prove, perform, produce. In that stillness, a new relationship forms, one with the self. One that says, you are already enough, even if you bring nothing home. Closing meditation. Letting go of the need to catch tonight. Before sleep, close your eyes. Picture yourself in a boat, floating gently on calm water. There is no urgency, no destination, only the rhythmic sway of breath. Now ask, where in my life have I mistaken catching for meaning? What happens if I stop chasing and simply sit with what is? Feel your hands relax. Let the net fall from your grasp. Breathe. As the Buddha said, attachment is the root of suffering. Let go and be free. You are not your catch. You are the stillness before the cast, the witness to the sea, the breath before the story begins. And sometimes the most sacred thing is the silence that returns when you stop trying to take something from the moment. Story 16. The sound behind the bell. At the center of the monastery stood a bell, tall, bronze, and weathered by rain and incense smoke. It hung beneath a wooden eave, carved with sutras faded by time. Every morning at dawn, a monk would step barefoot onto the stone, raise the striker slowly, and let it fall with a gentle firmness. Gong. The sound rang out across the valley, low, wide, rich as thunder softened by silk. It awakened birds, stirred leaves, and called everyone into the day. The villagers loved the bell. They said it cleansed sorrow. They said it calmed grief. They said it brought prayers to heaven. But one day, it cracked. It was a fine crack, invisible to most, running just beneath the surface. The bell still rang, but the sound was different, thinner, sharper, less complete. The monks, concerned, gathered to discuss replacing it. Some suggested repairs, others argued tradition, but the oldest monk, Master Zen, said nothing for a long time. Then he finally whispered, "Leave it." A young novice, confused, asked him why. Zen smiled, "Because the bell is finally telling the truth." That night, Master Zen sat before the bell alone. He placed his palm against its cool metal and closed his eyes. The crack beneath his skin felt familiar. He thought of the years he'd spent silencing his own fractures, the early losses, the hidden anger, the doubt that never left, no matter how many scriptures he recited, all masked beneath a practiced calm. He had been a bell, resonant, revered, clear, but not whole. And now, with age, the sound had changed. It was no longer perfect. It was honest. Reflection, the sound. Beneath the surface, Zen reminds us that truth is not always harmonious. We idealize clarity. We seek purity of sound, of self, of spirit. But life is not a pure tone. It is a series of overtones, imperfections, resonances born of fracture and depth. A cracked bell does not fail to ring. It rings more truthfully, because now it carries everything, all the storms, all the silence, all the breaks. We spend so much of our lives polishing the bell, smoothing out flaws, controlling tone, curating image. But wisdom does not come from surface shine. It comes from the sound behind the sound, from what echoes after the striking stops. Psychological insight, integration. Over-idealization in modern psychology, especially in trauma work, there is a principle of integration, bringing all parts of the self into awareness, not just the pleasant or healed ones. Too often, we strive to be fixed versions of ourselves, coherent, composed, consistent. But healing is not returning to how we were before we cracked. It is learning to resonate with the cracks. Authenticity does not sound like perfection. It sounds like someone who has lived, who has hurt, who has forgiven, who has stopped hiding. Master Zen knew that a clear tone might inspire admiration, but a cracked one invites presence. Closing meditation. Listening to the hidden sound tonight. Before you sleep, imagine a bell. Not flawless, not new. A bell that has rung through sorrow, a bell that knows impermanence, a bell that still sings even now. Now ask, where have I been hiding my cracks in fear of being seen as broken? What if the sound that comes through my pain is the most sacred thing I carry? Sit in stillness. Let the imagined sound ring once, long, deep, imperfect, and feel it inside you. As the Buddha said, there is no sound louder than the silence of truth. Tonight, you do not need to be whole. You only need to be real. Let the echo rise from your center, not the one others expect to hear, but the one that remains when you stop trying to be anything at all. You are not the bell, you are the space that listens. Story 17, The Stone That Floated. There is a story the monks tell, though no one is quite sure if it ever happened. They say that long ago, during a time of drought and silence, a traveller came to the temple carrying a stone in his satchel. It was smooth and grey, nothing special at first glance, perhaps a river stone or a piece of fallen mountain. He did not speak much, but he kept the stone with him at all times. He placed it beside his cushion during meditation. He held it in his palm when walking the temple path. He even placed it gently on the windowsill when he slept. The other monks began to whisper. Some believed it was a relic or a talisman. Others thought it was a burden he could not let go of. No one dared ask. Until one day, during a full moon, the traveller walked alone to the temple pond and with great care placed the stone atop the water, and it floated. The monks, who had followed quietly from a distance, gasped. The traveller said nothing. He turned, bowed toward the moonlit pond, and left the temple the next morning. No one saw him again, and though the pond never held another floating stone, the story remained, not because it was proven true, but because it felt true. And in Zen, sometimes what feels true carries more weight than what can be measured. Years later, a young monk named Sho asked the abbot what the story meant. Why would a stone float? The abbot smiled. Because he no longer needed it to sink. Sho was silent, but inside him something stirred. He thought of all the stones he carried, the shame of mistakes, the heaviness of expectation, the old guilt that clung to him like wet cloth. He had learned to carry them well, to bear the weight with a straight back and a quiet mouth, but he had never once asked whether he needed to. He had assumed the stone's nature was to sink. He had never considered that some weights are not inherent. Some are given, some are inherited, some are imagined, and some, when truly seen, are lighter than we believe. Reflection. The burden that teaches us who we are. There are burdens we carry that shape us. Some we choose, some we are born into. Others are handed to us silently, through family, culture, memory. We walk through life with these stones in our pockets, forgetting they are not part of us. In Zen, a koan is often paradoxical, a question that breaks logic and points us back to presence. The story of the floating stone is a koan for the soul. It asks, what are you carrying that no longer needs to sink? The miracle is not that the stone floated. The miracle is that the man no longer held it with the weight of identity. And so it rose, not because its nature changed, but because his did daunt psychological insight, cognitive reframing, and symbolic release. In therapeutic practice, there's a principle known as cognitive reframing, the process of looking at a thought or belief from a new angle to loosen its emotional grip. Many people carry emotional burdens based on outdated beliefs. If I let go, I'll fall. If I forgive, I'll betray myself. If I rest, I'll become weak. But like the traveller's stone, many of these weights are sustained not by their mass, but by our attachment to them. The act of symbolically releasing them, through ritual, visualization, even story, can allow the subconscious to reimagine freedom. Not everything we carry is ours to keep, and sometimes what sinks us has always wanted to float. Closing meditation. Releasing the stone tonight before sleep. Lie quietly. Imagine you are standing beside a still pond. In your hand is a stone. It may represent shame or grief, or a name you no longer need to answer. 2. Now ask, what am I carrying out of habit, fear, or inheritance that no longer serves my becoming? Feel its weight, honor what it taught you, then, gently, place it on the water and watch. Perhaps it will sink, perhaps it will float, but either way, you have set it down. As the Buddha said, you can only lose what you cling to. Let the ripples carry your release. Let the pond reflect your courage. And let your breath become a new beginning, one that floats. Story 18. The Door with No Key. In the eastern wing of the old monastery, there was a door that had no keyhole. It was tall and narrow, made of faded red wood, its edges smoothed by centuries of wind and fingertips. Unlike the others in the temple, it did not creak when touched, did not yield when pushed, and offered no handle. It stood within a stone frame like a question without punctuation. No monk could remember a time it had been opened. No one knew what lay behind it, and so it became a kind of riddle, silent, patient, unmoving. Visitors asked about it. Where does it lead? Why is it locked? Is there a key hidden somewhere? The monks only bowed in response, because some questions were not meant to be answered directly. One day, a young woman named Aiko arrived at the temple. She had tried everything: therapy, travel, prayer, detachment. She had read books with titles that promised freedom, practiced yoga until her limbs ached, sat in silence until it became noise. And yet, there was a heaviness inside her, a sense of being stuck behind something invisible. She did not call it depression, nor grief, nor anxiety. She only called it the room I can't get out of. When she saw the door in the monastery, she froze. She could not explain why, but she felt something tighten in her chest. It was as if the door mirrored a part of her, something sealed, hidden, unreachable. Each day she passed it, she paused, stared, and each night she dreamed of standing before it, empty-handed. On the 7th day, she approached the abbot. "What is behind the door?" she asked. He smiled gently. "What do you fear is behind it?" She hesitated. "Nothing. That's the fear." He nodded, as if she had already answered her own question. "Then open it," he said. "But there's no key." The abbot leaned closer. "Not every door opens by unlocking." That night, in the deep hush of pre-dawn, Aiko returned to the hallway. The temple was silent, the air cold with breath and absence. She sat before the door and did not try to open it. She did not press her palms against it. She did not demand it reveal itself. She simply sat and listened. And in that stillness, something shifted, not in the door, but in her. She realized she had spent her whole life trying to force open what could only be entered by surrender. The door was never locked. She had just never stayed still long enough to feel it dissolve. Reflection. The illusion of barriers. We often believe our suffering is the result of something external: a locked door, an absent answer, a life withheld. But in Zen, we are reminded that many doors are not locked at all. They are illusions created by the mind. Fear, unworthiness, clinging to outcome. These are the walls we build and the locks we imagine. The truth is that presence has no barrier, only resistance does. Aiko's door did not require a key. It required stillness. It required willingness to be where she was without needing to be anywhere else. And when she surrendered, the door disappeared. Psychological insight. The inner wall and the power of allowing. In therapeutic language, we might call this experience a confrontation with internal resistance. The subconscious walls we build to avoid pain, vulnerability, or uncertainty. The locked door is often a metaphor for early defense mechanisms, a way of protecting the self from emotions or truths that once felt overwhelming. But as adults, These old protections can become prisons. We keep pushing, solving, fixing. Rarely do we pause to ask, what if the door only appears closed because I am not yet ready to stop pushing? Healing comes not from effort alone, it comes from allowing, from creating enough safety inside to trust what's behind the door. Closing meditation. Sitting with the door tonight, before you sleep, close your eyes. Picture a door. It may be old, familiar. Maybe you've stood before it your whole life. You don't need to open it. You don't even need to understand it. Just sit and ask, what have I been trying to unlock with force that might open with stillness? What if the answer is not behind the door, but in my willingness to wait beside it? Breathe gently. As the Buddha said, the mind is everything. What you think you become. Perhaps tonight you stop trying to become and instead just sit as you are, whole, without keys, without escape. And in that space, silent, honest, enough, you may discover that the door was never a door at all, just the threshold between fear and peace. Story 19. The Rain That Fell Inward. It was the season of monsoon, and the rain had become a way of life. Each morning began with the low breath of thunder beyond the hills. By noon, the clouds would gather like monks in deep conference, dark and silent, until suddenly, without signal, they wept. The temple roofs dripped like slow clocks. The paths turned soft and quiet. The forest breathed deeper. The rain came from all directions, sideways, straight down, even up from the stone when puddles splashed under hurried sandals. It soaked everything. And yet there was one monk who stayed dry, not in body, but in heart. His name was Senzu. And though the rain came without mercy, it never seemed to reach him inside. He smiled politely, chanted when required, served tea with grace. But his eyes never truly reflected the sky. People said he had endured something long ago, something deep, a betrayal, a loss, a shame unspoken. No one asked, and he never told, until the day he walked into the zendo, sat cross-legged on the floor, and said aloud, without preamble, "It's been raining inside me for years." The room grew still. Even the wind seemed to pause. "I kept the windows closed," he continued. "I didn't want it to get out. I didn't want it to spread." He looked down at his hands, but it soaked everything anyway. He spoke, not with drama, but with the quiet weight of someone who had finally grown tired of pretending he wasn't drenched. Later that night, he sat beneath the open eaves, allowing the real rain to fall on his shoulders. The other monks watched, from the hall, uncertain, but one by one, without words, they joined him, not to fix, not to comfort, just to sit in the rain, and for the first time in years, Senzu let it fall, not just on his robes, but through the walls he had built inside. The rain fell inward, and in that falling, he softened. Reflection. The storm. We don't share. We all carry weather. Inside. Memories that haunt like thunder. Grief that arrives in heavy clouds. Regret that drips slowly, constantly, just out of sight. Some of us learn to mask it, to smile through the storm, to sweep the water before it pools. But Zen does not ask us to dry off before entering the temple. It invites us to sit with the rain, to hear it, to feel it, to bow to its wisdom, because some storms do not come to destroy, they come to cleanse. Psychological insight, emotional suppression and somatic release. In psychological practice, unexpressed emotion often manifests as physical tension, chronic fatigue, or a dull emptiness. We suppress to survive. We disconnect because connection once hurt. But when pain is stored and not processed, it becomes weather without sky, a storm that loops endlessly within. Senzu's healing did not come from fixing the rain. It came from welcoming it, allowing himself to feel fully what he had long denied, not with judgment, but with presence. That's how trauma softens, not through answers, but through acceptance. Closing meditation, letting it rain. Tonight, before sleep, lie still. Imagine a sky above your chest, wide, expansive. Now ask, what rain have I kept inside for too long? What storm am I afraid to feel? Because I fear it will never stop. Breathe gently. If tears come, let them. If stillness comes, let that too. As the Buddha said, the emotion that can break your heart is sometimes the very one that heals it. Let the rain fall, not as punishment, but as return, to feeling, to softness, to yourself. You are not broken by the storm, you are broken open. And sometimes the most honest healing is simply learning how to get wet. Story 20. The garden that grew in silence. There was a garden behind the temple that no one claimed. It sat beyond the stone path and the last row of prayer flags, untended, unmarked, almost forgotten. While the monks trimmed the plum trees near, the gate and swept the gravel raked into waves, no one ever touched the garden behind the silence wall. And yet, something bloomed there, not in rose, not in colour, but in mystery. Tiny white flowers like shy stars, moss so soft it silenced footsteps, ferns that unfurled slowly, as if remembering how to breathe. It was said the garden had never been planted, that it had grown on its own, through the stillness of years. And those who wandered near it, especially those who didn't speak, often found themselves stopping, breath catching, heart softening, without knowing why. One afternoon, a monk named Riku discovered it by accident. He had come to the monastery after a long illness, an invisible kind. His body functioned, his words made sense, but inside he felt empty, as though someone had hollowed him out and left only echoes behind. He did not seek enlightenment, he sought quiet, not the kind that merely muffles sound, but the kind that cradles what hurts without trying to fix it. He wandered behind the last wall and paused, surprised. There was no gate, no sign, just soft green light. He sat on a moss-covered stone and listened, not for anything, just to listen. And what he heard was not silence, it was life beneath noise. The garden never greeted him, but it welcomed him, and so he returned each day, not to meditate, but to be. No mantras, no posture, just breath and green and the steady patience of things that grow without being watched. One day, another monk asked Riku where he had been going. Nowhere, he said, then paused and added, to the garden. The monk tilted his head. What do you do there? Riku thought for a moment. I unlearn how to speak. Reflection. The growth beneath. Noise. We live in a world addicted to answers, to commentary, to analysis, to sound. Even in spiritual circles, silence is often filled with guided words, with structured stillness, with meditations that explain more than they offer. But true silence is not empty. It is generative. It grows things beneath the surface. Like the garden behind the wall, our deepest healing often happens away from performance, where we are not watched, evaluated, or expected to bloom. It is in these moments, unstructured, unspoken, that we return to our original rhythm, not as a project, but as a presence. Psychological insight, the role of nonverbal. Healing. Modern psychology acknowledges what ancient wisdom already knew. Healing does not always come through language. Some wounds are pre-verbal, formed before words. Others are beyond them, stored in the body, the breath, the unconscious rhythm of being. Therapies like somatic experiencing, trauma-informed movement, and even ecotherapy validate what the garden teaches. Sometimes growth happens in silence, where the nervous system relaxes, where the inner child hides, where the soul waits to exhale. Riku did not heal by understanding his pain. He healed by no longer needing to perform it. Closing meditation, making space for the silent garden tonight. Before sleep, find a still place within, not to control, not to solve, just to sit quietly like moss. Now ask, where in my life am I still speaking when silence is what I need? What might grow in me if I stopped narrating my healing and simply allowed it to unfold? Breathe slowly. Picture a garden behind all your words. Nothing you planted, nothing you pruned, just the soft mystery of life returning without needing permission. As the Buddha said, silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. Tonight, may you rest in that fullness. No guidance, no goal, only green and breath and the quiet grace of something in you, blooming, unseen. Story 21. The monk who didn't speak. He had been at the monastery longer than anyone could remember. He wore the same earth-toned robe each season, his sleeves slightly frayed, his sandals worn smooth. He tended the stone paths at dawn, fed the birds that gathered near the bell tower, and bowed, always deeply, to everyone, no matter how young or old. But he never spoke. Not once. Not a whisper. Not a chant. Not a single syllable slipped past his lips. Newcomers found it curious at first. Some assumed he had taken a vow of silence. Others believed he could not speak at all, but no one really knew. The abbot never explained. The older monks only smiled when asked. He doesn't speak, they would say gently, but he says more than most. One afternoon, a scholar named Daisuke arrived at the temple. He came not for silence, but for answers. Clear, logical, defendable. He carried a notebook thick with questions on suffering, enlightenment, karma, and impermanence. He had studied the sutras, debated professors, and collected teachings like rare coins. He had come for wisdom. Instead, he was assigned to sweep leaves alongside the silent monk. At first, Daisuke found it insulting. He was not a novice. He was a seeker of insight, a man of thought. What could he possibly learn from a man who didn't speak? The monk said nothing, only handed him a broom. They swept for hours, under trees, along worn steps, behind mossy walls. The wind scattered the leaves almost as quickly as they were gathered. It felt endless, pointless, maddening. Daisuke finally slammed his broom to the ground. "What is the purpose of this?" he demanded. "You sweep, and the leaves return. You do this every day, and still the garden fills again." The monk looked at him, then knelt, picked up a single golden leaf, and placed it gently in Daisuke's palm. Then he bowed and resumed sweeping. Daisuke stared at the leaf and said nothing. That evening, he wrote nothing in his journal. The next day, he asked to sweep with the monk again, and the day after. By the end of the week, Daisuke no longer needed words. He had begun to feel the rhythm of the monk's quiet presence, the way he noticed small things, an insect beneath a stone, the way light landed on a broken step, the shift in air just before it rained. It was communication beyond sound. It was stillness that made space. It was truth, without noise. Reflection, the language beneath silence. There is a kind of silence that is empty, avoidant, hollow, defensive. But there is another kind, a silence that holds, listens, understands without interruption. This was the monk's silence. In Zen, we often speak of direct transmission beyond words, a knowing that passes not through speech, but through presence, through being. The monk taught not by explaining, but by embodying. He didn't point to wisdom. He became the space in which wisdom revealed itself. Psychological insight. The power of nonverbal presence. Modern psychology recognizes the importance of co-regulation, the way nervous systems attune to one another, often without words. A calm presence can soothe an anxious mind. A quiet witness can validate pain more deeply than 1,000 reassurances. The monk's silence was not absence. It was containment, a steady, regulated energy that said, "You are safe. You are not judged. There is nothing you need to prove here." Many of us speak out of anxiety, out of habit, out of the need to fill silence before it becomes too honest. But healing begins when someone holds space and allows us to stop performing. Closing meditation, returning to the wordless, self tonight, before sleep. Lie down and let your breath soften. Picture yourself in a garden, rake in hand, sweeping alongside someone who says nothing, but who sees you completely. Now ask, where in my life am I speaking not to express, but to protect? What would happen if I said nothing and trusted that silence could hold me? Breathe into the question. As the Buddha said, when the mouth is silent, the heart begins to speak. Let the heart speak now, not with phrases, but with presence, with the sound of your breath, with the warmth in your chest, with the gentle knowing that you no longer need to say anything to be completely heard. Story 22. The Candle in Daylight. It sat on the windowsill of the old library, small, unlit, and unnoticed. The candle was simple. No intricate carvings, no fragrance, no colour other than pale ivory. The wick had been burned once, long ago, but not recently. Dust gathered at its base, cobwebs curled along the sill, and yet it remained. Each morning, sunlight would pour through the window and bathe it in gold. The room glowed, scrolls shone. The wooden shelves stretched their long shadows across the floor. But the candle stayed quiet. It did not shine. It did not flicker. It did not need to. Because what use is a candle in daylight? There was a monk who often sat by the window to read. Her name was Mira. She was quiet, observant, given to long silences between thoughts. The other monks joke that she studied not just the texts, but the air between them. She smiled when they said that, because it was true. Mira had once burned brightly. In her youth, she was a firebrand, leading retreats, organizing service, offering counsel to those in pain. Her flame had guided many, and for years she took pride in being needed. But somewhere along the way, the world grew brighter, Others rose. New voices emerged. The light no longer bent toward her, and so she withdrew, not out of bitterness, but out of confusion. She had defined herself by her usefulness. Now that others had light of their own, who was she? One afternoon, she looked up from her book and noticed the candle. It was nothing remarkable, just there. And in that moment, something clicked. The candle was not failing. It was simply unnecessary. Right now. Not obsolete. Not diminished. Only waiting. Not every flame needs to burn at all times. Some flames rest in daylight. And that is not weakness. That is wisdom. She began to visit the candle daily. She never lit it. She simply sat beside it. And over time, she realized she had not lost her light. She had simply stepped out of the dark, and it was okay to not always be the source of illumination. Reflection. The value of quiet light. In a world that celebrates visibility, being loud, active, always on, there is deep spiritual fatigue that comes from feeling unseen. Many of us are candles that once burned brightly, teachers, healers, creators, parents. We lit the path for others. We warmed the rooms we entered. But when others begin to shine, or when circumstances shift, we may feel irrelevant, unneeded, dimmed. But Zen reminds us, the candle is not lost just because the sun is out. It is simply not time to burn. Psychological insight, aging, purpose, and identity. Dissolution psychologically, identity tied to roles, especially caregiving, leadership, or performance, can become fragile when those roles change or fade. Retirement, children leaving, spiritual shifts. Many experience an identity crisis. If I'm not serving, who am I? But deep maturity comes from decentering the ego, allowing oneself to rest in presence, not in performance. The candle in daylight teaches this. You are still light, even when you are not lit. Your being holds value, even when it is quiet. Closing meditation, honoring your quiet flame tonight. Before sleep, sit in darkness with a single unlit candle before you. Do not light it. Just gaze. Now ask, where have I mistaken visibility for worth? Can I allow myself to rest and still know I am luminous? Breathe deeply. Let the still candle reflect something in you that no longer needs to prove itself. As the Buddha said, do not seek to shine, seek to be clear. Clarity does not always sparkle. Sometimes it waits on the windowsill, silent, ready, at peace. Let your flame rest tonight, not because it's gone, but because you've carried enough light for others. Now, simply be in the glow of your own unburned beauty. Story 23. The Thread of Nothing. It was the smallest thing in the entire monastery. Tucked into a bowl of offerings near the statue of Avalokitesvara, it sat curled like a whisper, barely visible, often mistaken for lint or ash. Most visitors never saw it. Even the monks passed it without notice. But it was there, a single thread, pale grey, frayed at both ends, no longer part of any cloth, no longer tied to any robe. It had somehow survived all cleaning, sorting, sweeping. One day, during temple cleaning, a novice named Lin noticed it. He reached to throw it away, instinctively, without thought, but something stopped him. He stared at the thread. It was nothing really, and yet it was still here. Why? He placed it on a windowsill instead of the trash bin. Each day afterward, he returned to check on it. It never moved, never decayed. It simply rested there, like an old memory that had long since let go of its story. Lin became quietly obsessed with it. It bothered him at first, how something so small, so useless, continued to exist. The monastery ran efficiently. Everything had a place, a purpose, a cycle. But this thread, it did nothing. It was no longer holding anything together. It offered no warmth. It had no form, no function, no reason to be. And yet, it was. One evening, Lin brought his question to the abbot. "Master," he said, "I've been watching a thread." The abbot raised an eyebrow, amused. "Ah, a koan in fibre." Lin frowned. "I don't understand why it bothers me. It's so useless." The abbot leaned forward. "Is it bothering you because it is useless, or because it is still at peace?" Despite being useless, Lin blinked and said nothing. That night, he returned to the thread and sat with it. He watched how it did not flinch in the wind, how it did not seek to be woven back into meaning, how it simply was, without effort, without explanation, and for the first time in his life, Lin felt what it meant to exist without identity. Reflection. The space between function and being modern life is built around utility. What do you do? What are you good at? How do you matter? Even in healing, we search for use. What did I learn from my pain? How has this made me better? But Zen points elsewhere, to the thread of nothing, to the space where being is not justified by contribution, where the self is not stitched to value. The thread in Lin's story was no longer serving, but it was still sacred. Not because of what it offered, but because it reminded him you are allowed to be, even when you are nothing to anyone else. Psychological insight, identity deconstruction and restorative presence. In psychological frameworks like internal family systems, IFS, and existential therapy, there's growing attention to the false self, the persona we construct to gain love, acceptance, protection. We become the helpful one, the smart one, the funny one, the spiritual one. But beneath that is something more fragile, more whole. The part of us that simply is, not performing, not adjusting, just resting. We often fear that if we stop performing, we'll vanish. But in truth, we meet our real self in that quiet void. Like the thread, we remain even when the fabric is gone. Closing meditation. Being the thread tonight before sleep, close your eyes and picture a thread, not attached to anything, not pulling weight, not holding form, just resting on the palm of your hand. Now ask, who am I when I am not holding anything together? What part of me is still sacred when I stop proving, fixing, doing? As the Buddha said, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Let the thread be your reminder. You are not required to be woven. You are not required to hold everything in place. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be nothing for a while. And in that nothing, you may remember who you were before you became anyone at all. Story 24. The Boat That Waited. There was a small boat tied to the shore of the temple lake. It had no name. Its wood was faded grey, its oars sun-worn, and a shallow puddle always collected in its hull after rain. No monk could remember who had last used it. It had not left the dock in years. It creaked with every breeze but never drifted. It rocked but never complained. It simply waited. Children who visited the temple would run their fingers along its edge, imagining adventures. Old pilgrims would glance at it fondly, as if it reminded them of something long buried. But no one ever untied it, except one. A man named Yuta arrived at the temple in winter. He did not come for teaching, nor retreat. He came because he had nowhere else to go. His life had unraveled slowly, not in catastrophe, but in a series of quiet slips. Relationships fraying, a job that lost its meaning, a growing disinterest in the very things that used to define him. He was not broken. He was simply adrift. He sat beside the lake each morning, staring at the unmoving boat, and somehow it seemed to understand him. One morning, snow fell lightly. The lake was still, a mirror made of silence. Yuta stood at the dock, watching the boat shift softly against the ropes. Then, without plan or purpose, he stepped in. The boat swayed, surprised. He sat, hands resting on his knees, eyes open, not seeking. He did not untie it. He just sat. He returned the next day, and the day after. Always the same. No movement, no destination. Only presence. Eventually, another monk joined him. Then a novice. Then a woman passing through who didn't ask for permission. Soon, without speaking, the boat became something sacred. Not for traveling, but for waiting. Reflection. The wisdom of stillness we are taught to act, to set goals, move forward, solve, achieve, build. But there are moments in life when the wisest thing we can do is wait, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because rushing would fracture something still forming. Yuta did not need a journey, he needed a container. Something steady, something that rocked gently, something that said, "You don't need to go anywhere today." The boat did not rescue him, it received him, and in that receiving, he began to return to himself. Psychological insight, the healing power of pausing. In modern psychology, particularly in trauma-informed therapy, we recognize the importance of the pause, periods of not knowing, not doing. They are often pathologized, called stagnation, avoidance, depression. But these moments can also be deeply restorative. The nervous system heals when it is not under demand. The heart mends when it is not being pulled. The psyche reintegrates in the absence of expectation. Yuta's stillness in the boat allowed his identity to deflate, not collapse, but decompress, to stop trying to fix what never needed fixing, to simply breathe without becoming. Closing meditation. Sitting in the boat tonight before sleep. Close your eyes. Picture a boat. Small. Quiet. Waiting on a still lake. You step into it, not to go, but to stay. Now ask, what have I been rushing to resolve that might simply need more time? Where can I offer myself the grace to just sit? Breathe with the boat. Feel its gentle sway. Feel yourself held without question. As the Buddha said, the mind is like water. When it is still, it reflects the truth. Tonight, let your boat be still. Let the lake receive your silence. Let waiting become prayer. Let rest become return. You are not lost. You are only pausing, and the boat will wait with you. Story 25. The Last Cup of Tea. It was late in the afternoon when the master poured his final cup of tea. The sun hung low over the mountains, casting long amber shadows across the stone veranda. A faint wind stirred the prayer flags. The monastery breathed in its usual rhythm, bowls washed, floors swept, incense winding through wooden corridors. The old master, whose name was no longer spoken with formality, sat across from his longtime student. They had done this many times before. Tea, silence, a glance, a smile. But today was different. There was a stillness that did not ask for attention, a quiet that held something unspoken. The student, now a teacher in his own right, noticed the master's hands. Slower, thinner, more transparent than memory. The kettle whispered, the steam rose, the master poured, and offered the cup with both hands, as always. The student took it, bowed his head, then asked softly, "Is this the last?" The master did not answer right away. He looked out over the garden, where the last plum blossoms were falling. Then he smiled. "No," he said, "only the last one I will serve." They sat in silence, sipping. The tea was simple, green, earthy, just the right heat. It was not extraordinary, and yet it was perfect, not because of flavor, but because it was fully shared. There was no rush, no next, no lesson to follow, just presence, and the gentle echo of time passing with kindness. After some time, the master set down his empty cup. "Do you remember your first?" he asked. The student smiled. "I do. I held it like it was sacred. I was afraid to drink. I thought I would miss the teaching." The master chuckled. "You did." They both laughed. The student bowed, eyes wet. "But I understand now." The master stood slowly. "You understand because you've tasted enough cups to know. Tea is not about the tea. It's about who you are when you drink it." He looked at the student one last time. "And who you are when the cup is empty." Then he turned and walked into the garden, moving like someone who had finally poured his last offering. Reflection, the beauty of completion. Every ceremony ends. Every season closes. Every journey, however sacred, comes to its last bend, and Zen teaches us that finality is not failure, it is fullness. The last cup of tea is not the end of tea. It is the moment when nothing else is needed. No more searching, no more fixing, just presence, distilled. The master did not cling to one more cup, because he had poured enough, because the silence that follows was part of the lesson too. Psychological insight, death, letting go, and integration. In therapeutic work, endings are often met with grief, resistance, or fear. We try to prolong what is meaningful, to delay closure, to resist stillness. But true integration happens when we allow endings to be as sacred as beginnings. Completion is not disappearance. It is acknowledgement of what has been lived, of what has been felt, of what no longer needs to be repeated. The last cup of tea symbolizes a release of identity, of the teacher, the student, the roles we play, and what remains is peace. Closing meditation, drinking the final cup tonight. Before sleep, imagine yourself holding a warm cup. It is the last of the day, the last before stillness, the last before dreams. Now ask, what have I held long enough? What can I now set down? Not in sorrow, but in gratitude. Drink slowly, not just the tea, but the moment. Let each sip say goodbye. Let each breath say thank you. As the Buddha said, drink your tea slowly and reverently, as if it is the axis on which the world turns. Tonight, the world does not need You're doing. It only asks for your presence. Finish your cup. Place it down. Breathe. And know you have arrived. Dear listener, if you've made it this far, you've not only walked through 25 stories, you've walked through 25 doorways within yourself. Each tale, each silence, each breath was an invitation to come home, to soften, to remember not who you were supposed to be, but who you already are beneath the noise. These stories were never meant to preach or instruct. They were meant to sit beside you in your quiet moments, your sleepless nights, your healing hours. If any of these stories stayed with you, even one line, one pause, one tear, then the thread between us is already real. We'd love to know what touched you most. Which story reflected your own path? Which silence taught you something your mind couldn't explain? Please share your reflections in the comments. If these stories offered you comfort or clarity, consider liking this video. It helps more people find their way here. And if you'd like to walk further with us, please subscribe. There are more stories to come. Not to fix you, but to walk with you. You are not alone. Even in silence, we are connected. Until next time, breathe gently. And thank you for listening.